Hey everyone, welcome to Creating the Comic, Episode 1. So, the Creating the Comic series is going to track my journey through creating and publishing my very first comic book, and maybe beyond. So, right off the bat, I want to be clear that while I'm sharing things that I've learned and experienced, I'm by no means an expert, and I'm still in the process of learning myself. So, I'll try to mitigate that inexperience by doing a good deal of research and interviewing experts, and we have some great interviews already lined up. But with that being said, it's been such an interesting experience, and I've met so many people and talked with people who are either a little bit further along or a little bit further behind that I thought that it would be fun to share my experience. And selfishly, it gives me a reason to keep going and make sure that I'm hitting the deadlines that I want to hit. So, without further ado, let's get to today's topic. So, on this episode, we're going to talk about writing. If you decided to create a comic, then the first step is going to be writing a comic book script. While we will be talking about writing, this episode is going to be more of a broad and big picture view of it. This isn't a tutorial on comic writing, though I will cover some important ideas, and I'll be sure to share links to some great resources. To start, it's important to note the difference between comic writing and writing prose. When you write prose, you're writing directly to the reader. Your words are going to paint whatever mental picture you want in the reader's head. Your words are going to be used to draw out whatever emotion and feeling you want out of the reader. When you're writing a comic, you're writing to at least one and likely many artists. They take your words and turn them into the images that you want. As a comic writer, you're writing to a middleman, not the customer. So, a comic script is really just a set of instructions on how to create the visual story that you want to tell. And contrary to what people might say, it's not that easy. There's a common misconception that comic writing is easy, and that's far from the truth. It's difficult and takes a lot of work and organization to get it right. It's also important to note that since comics are a visual medium, there should be something visually interesting about the story or idea you're trying to tell. Now, this is an admittedly broad statement, but as a writer, you want to think about what makes the idea interesting to look at and why it belongs in a comic form versus other mediums. So where do we start? For me, I started with the idea for a story that I thought would likely be a graphic novel spanning 2 to 3 books. Now, obviously, this is an ambitious idea for someone with zero writing experience, so I did research on what would be the appropriate steps to take. And for me, it became clear that baby steps were needed. So the first step is pretty simple. Make sure that you're reading comics. As I mentioned, writing comics is harder than you would think. And if you aren't reading them, it's difficult to understand the language and how stories are communicated in this medium. While reading, try to incorporate a variety of different books. Read single issues, read graphic novels, read mainstream books, read indie books. Try to get a variety in and start to take note of things that work, things that don't work, things that you like, and it'll help you form an idea and a language that you want to tell these stories in. So the second step is to read comic book scripts. I think this is important for several reasons. Since writing comic scripts is like learning a new language, there's no better way to understand it than by reading scripts. The more that you read scripts, the more the language starts to make sense and you can understand the flow and why scripts are written the way they are. Another reason why reading scripts is important is because there's no set format or method to writing comic book scripts. And reading a variety of scripts may help you find the method that works for you. Another fun activity you can do while reading these scripts is to draw based on what you're reading. Now, you don't have to be a good artist. I'm terrible. But you could do this just with stick figures. This activity works because, again, it starts to get you into the mindset of the artist and will kind of teach you what instructions you want to give to the artist when you're having them draw your script. So the next step would be to talk to other writers. Every writer, no matter how experienced, has valuable information to share, and all come at it from their own perspective. If you have the opportunity to go to cons, do that. It's a great chance to meet writers. Otherwise, Facebook, Reddit, Discord have plenty of great writers groups with tons of valuable info. I'll leave some links in the description below. So the next step is utilize resources on comic writing scripts. This could be in the form of books, online courses, YouTube, just Google. There are tons of resources on how to write comics, and I think it's really important to go through and learn from a variety of these. You'll gain great insight. Personally, in addition to doing a decent amount of research online, I took an online course and I read The Art of Comic Writing, and I gained a lot from doing that. Whatever the case for you, I highly recommend taking this step because there are a lot of small details in writing scripts and writing comic strips that will be missed, even if you're reading a lot of comics and reading a lot of comic book scripts. So once you're ready to start writing, it is important to know the components of a script. So as I mentioned before, there's no set standard or format for writing comic scripts, but there are some important best practices. While this isn't a step-by-step tutorial, there are some important things to take note, and any new writer should be aware of this. First, each page is broken up into panels, and generally, you'll be writing exactly what's happening on each panel. And within each panel, there are several bits of information that you need to communicate. First is a description of what you want visually. Then you need to include any dialogue, captions, and then onomatopoeia. Everything should be clearly laid out and easy to understand. It's like writing an instruction manual. Now, one thing many writers struggle with, including myself, is being clear with what you want on each panel. So let's say, you have a panel in which you want someone to kick in a door. If you simply write, Barry is kicking the door open, that's not very clear. Since a panel is a static image, it's impossible to show Barry kicking in the door in one image. Kicking in the door means starting with the closed door, kicking at the door flying open. We need to explain which part of this process we want to record on the page. So instead of saying Barry is kicking the door open, we might say, shot from inside the room, we see a door 3/4 of the way open. Bits of wood can be seen flying from where the lock was broken. We can see Barry framed in the doorway, his foot extended as he's in the middle of kicking the door open. Now, this isn't a perfect description, but it is more descriptive than simply Barry's kicking the door open. So take care to be very clear with what you want to see on the frame and write that. Otherwise, you'll either confuse the artist or you may get something that is not what you expected or what you wanted. So another important thing is to be judicious with your dialogue. Comics are an inherently visual medium, and that means that too much dialogue presents a few problems. First, it's difficult to fit a lot of dialogue on a panel. Second, the dialogue has to go somewhere. Means more dialogue, less art. And while you'll generally need dialogue to advance your story, try to be as clear and concise as you can in order to manage that. Another important thing to consider while you're outlining your script is to consider page turns. Page turns are exactly what it sounds like. It's spots in the script where you want a reader to turn the page. In the case of comics, this is the odd pages. And as a general rule, you want to incorporate page turns into your script by compelling the reader to turn to the next page. This means that when there's a big moment or a big reveal, you set it up on the last panel of an odd page and compel the reader to turn the page to see what happens next. The final component I'll talk about is page count. Printed comics come in a variety of numbers, but they almost always come in a number divisible by 4. This has to do with how the pages are printed. And since each sheet usually has 4 pages on it, you always want to write with that in mind. So with that in mind, unless you're writing as part of an anthology or a zine or webcomic, you should always write in a number divisible by 4. So what makes a good script? Well, in many ways, that's truly subjective. At the end of the day, a comic script is a conversation between a writer and an artist. So that relationship is also an important component. The artist-writer relationship is a conversation for another day. But some artists need to be micromanaged, while others can take prose or film script and turn it into a beautiful comic. Whatever the case, following the steps I've mentioned already will allow a writer to write for any artist and in any situation. So now we get to the good part. The next step is to write, and write a lot. Now, if you're like me, and you came to this with a big idea that you want to explore and write, I would encourage you to put that on the shelf for the time being. To start, I think it's more important to work on the craft and develop your own ability to write for comics. And at times, it might not be pretty. So I'd hold off the big story until you've built some confidence and have had others look at your work. To start, focus on shorter scripts. Begin with 4 to 8 page scripts. These don't need to be the best stories in the world, and they certainly don't need to be perfect. Early on, the focus is on getting a good grasp of the technical aspects of writing for comics. Then you can focus more on story and character. If you're struggling for ideas, Writing prompts and writing challenges represent great ways to come up with ideas as you're prompted, and then you can just write. I'll link to threads where this can be super useful. Another thing you can do is, if you are working on a big story, take some smaller side characters and just write about them. That might be a good way for you to write about something you're really interested in and engaged with without having to come up with something fully whole cloth. Another great thing is to find artists that are also just starting out. Since artists can cost a lot of money, it may not be worth taking your early work and giving it to somebody to draw. It just might be too expensive to do that. But if you find somebody who's starting out, it's a perfect trade for both of you. They get a script to work on their craft, and you get an artist to work on your script. So it's a great trade. Right now, if you're just starting off, the key is just to write and write a lot. So personally, that's exactly what I did, until I ended up with 10 scripts ranging from 4 pages to 32 pages, which I know completely goes against my own advice, but more on that specific script later because it's kind of an interesting combination of everything that I've talked about. So that's it for this episode of Creating the Comic. Next time, we're going to talk about what to do once you have all those scripts. Thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel. We can be found on all social media platforms at portable_whole. And if you want audio-only podcasts, we're on all major platforms at Portable Whole Publishing. And email us at portablewholepub@gmail.com.